Highway 13 wasn't on my original route, but after a late meeting and a phone GPS glitch, I had no choice but to take it. At first, it felt like just another road, long, quiet, uneventful. But then, around midnight, I noticed something odd. A car appeared in my rearview mirror. Its headlights flickered once, twice, and I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't just another driver. That's when the real nightmare began. The night was cold and moonless, the kind where every shadow feels alive. The two-lane highway stretched endlessly, cutting through dense forests on either side. I was alone. Just me, my aging sedan, and the hum of the tires against the asphalt. The clock on my dashboard read 12:03 a.m. The nearest town was miles away, and my phone signal had disappeared hours ago. Even the radio refused to cooperate, emitting nothing but static. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank left. Enough to get home, I thought. But as the miles rolled on, a strange sense of unease began to creep over me, as if the dark woods were watching. It started as a distant speck of light in my rearview mirror. A car, I thought. Probably another late traveler, but something felt off. The headlights weren't steady. They flickered, dimming and flaring up unpredictably, like a Morse code I couldn't decipher. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was an old vehicle with faulty lights. But then, the car sped up, closing the gap between us. Its headlights shone blindingly bright, making it impossible to see the road ahead. "What the hell?" I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I tapped my brakes gently, a signal for them to back off. Instead, the car honked, long and loud, an almost angry sound that echoed in the silence of the highway. It stayed behind me, matching my speed. Faster, slower, faster again. My pulse quickened. I glanced at the clock. 12:21 a.m. The road stretched on, and I couldn't see an exit in sight. The honking stopped, but the car didn't back off. It stayed just far enough that I couldn't make out the driver's face, but close enough to feel its presence. I reached for my phone instinctively, hoping to call for help, but of course, there was no signal. Then, the radio crackled to life. Static at first, then a voice, low, distorted and unintelligible. It spoke in bursts, like it was trying to form words. My heart raced. I slammed the radio off, but the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, until I yanked the volume knob and silenced it completely. I focused on the road, my knuckles white on the wheel. That's when I saw it, a gas station sign up ahead. Relief washed over me. I decided to pull in, lose the car, and figure out what to do next. But as I approached the turn, the headlights behind me blinked off completely. I glanced in the mirror, and the car was gone. Just gone. I slowed down, scanning the empty road behind me. Nothing. Only darkness. Did I imagine it? I whispered to myself. But then, the moment I passed the gas station, the headlights reappeared, closer than ever. My stomach dropped. Panic surged through me. I floored the gas pedal, my car lurching forward as the engine roared. The mysterious car matched my speed, its headlights now steady and blinding. I could feel it closing in. Suddenly, the road curved sharply, and I swerved to stay on track. My tires screeched, the car fishtailing before regaining control. When I looked in the mirror again, the headlights were gone. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A figure standing on the side of the road, a man in dark clothes, his face obscured by shadow. I barely had time to process before he stepped into the road. I slammed the brakes, my car skidding to a stop. When I looked up, he was gone. But behind me, in the rearview mirror, the headlights were back, closer than ever. And this time, I could see something, or someone, inside the car. A pale face staring at me with empty eyes. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I threw the car into reverse, spinning the wheel to turn around. My tires screeched as I sped back the way I came. The headlights followed for a moment, then disappeared once more. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands trembling, my mind racing. When I finally reached a familiar road, I pulled over, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed to life, the signal restored. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m. Had I really been driving that long? But as I sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I noticed something. A handprint on the outside of the window, smeared as if someone or something had tried to claw its way in. I made it home that night, but I haven't taken Highway 13 since. People say it's haunted, that strange things happen there after midnight. I don't know if I believe that. All I know is that sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I still see those flickering headlights in my rearview mirror. And every time, I wonder if they're coming back for me. They say Route 66 is haunted, especially the stretch near Blackwood Forest. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but on that foggy night, driving home from my cousin's wedding, I learned why locals avoid it after dark. It began innocently, a pair of headlights in my mirror. But what followed still keeps me awake at night. The night air was thick with fog, curling like smoke across the empty highway. My car's headlights barely pierced the gloom, illuminating only the immediate stretch of road ahead. I was alone, driving home after a long day of celebration. The radio played faintly, a comforting hum in the silence. Blackwood Forest loomed on either side of the road, its trees gnarled and ancient, the branches stretching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The road signs had faded with age, their words barely legible. Route 66, a highway steeped in history, felt like a relic of another time. I adjusted my rearview mirror and tried to shake off the creeping unease. It was just a road, I told myself, but as I'd soon discover, it was anything but ordinary. The first time I saw the headlights, I didn't think much of them. A car appeared in the distance behind me, its lights cutting through the fog. Finally, I thought, another traveler. But as the minutes passed, the car didn't seem to get closer. It stayed at the same distance, its headlights unwavering. I checked my speed, 50 miles per hour. Maybe they were just cautious in the fog, I thought. Then, out of nowhere, the car surged forward, closing the gap between us in seconds. It was so close that its lights filled my mirrors, blinding me. I squinted, waving a hand to block the glare. "What's your problem?" I muttered. I slowed down to let them pass, but they didn't. Instead, the headlights flickered twice, almost like a warning. My heart thudded in my chest. That's when I noticed something strange. No matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see the car. Just the lights. Bright, glaring, and impossibly close. A chill ran down my spine as I pressed the gas pedal, speeding up to put distance between me and the phantom lights. But no matter how fast I went, they stayed right behind me, relentless. I turned the radio up, trying to drown out the fear bubbling inside me. But the station suddenly cut out, replaced by a low, crackling static. Then came the whispers. At first I thought it was a trick of my mind, but the whispers grew louder. Words I couldn't understand, layered and overlapping, filled the car. I reached for the dial to turn it off, but it wouldn't budge. Ahead, the road forked into 2 lanes. Without thinking, I veered left, hoping to lose the lights, but as I glanced in the mirror, they followed, flickering more violently now. Then the car's engine began to sputter. My heart sank. No, 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 I whispered, gripping the wheel tightly. The engine groaned, then cut out completely, leaving me coasting to a stop in the middle of the road. I sat there in stunned silence, the fog pressing in on all sides. The lights behind me dimmed, then went out entirely. The darkness was suffocating, but just as I reached for my phone, a sound froze me in place. A knock. Soft at first, then louder. It was coming from the driver's side window. I turned slowly, my breath hitching. The window was fogged up, but I could make out the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass. I screamed, fumbling to lock the doors. My fingers shook as I pressed the button, but it was too late. The hand vanished and the car began to rock violently as if something or someone was trying to tip it over. In a panic, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I slammed the car into gear and hit the gas, my tires screeching as I sped away. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the lights again, but this time, they weren't following me. They were ahead, floating, waiting. The road curved sharply, and as I rounded the bend, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the highway, shrouded in shadow. Its eyes glowed, reflecting my headlights. I swerved to avoid it, the car skidding off the road and into a ditch. The impact jolted me forward, and my head slammed against the steering wheel. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the car was still. The headlights were off, and the road was eerily quiet. I looked around, disoriented, and realized the figure was gone. Shaking, I climbed out of the car, my knees buckling beneath me. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the twisted wreck of my front bumper. But as I turned to inspect the damage, I saw something else. A symbol etched into the dirt near my tire. A circle with 3 intersecting lines. It looked ancient, like something out of a nightmare. My pulse quickened. I scrambled back into the car and drove off, ignoring the grinding sound of metal against pavement. I made it home that night, but the symbol haunted me. I couldn't explain what I'd seen or how I'd survived. Weeks later, I found myself searching for stories about Route 66. That's when I learned about the Shadow Driver, a legend of a spirit that haunts the highway, marking its victims with a sign. Some say it's a warning. Others say it's a promise that it will return. And every time I see headlights in my rearview mirror now, I wonder, is it still watching me? I never stop for hitchhikers, especially not at night. But something about the man standing on Highway 22 that evening made me hesitate. He didn't wave or hold out his thumb. He just stood there, staring at my car as I approached. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored him. But curiosity got the better of me, and that's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life. The night was still, and the road stretched endlessly ahead of me, surrounded by fields that disappeared into the darkness. Highway 22 was infamous for being desolate, especially at night. The only sounds were the hum of my car engine and the occasional rattle from the loose change in my cup holder. I'd been driving for hours, heading back from a work trip that had run late. My eyelids felt heavy, and I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 11:48 p.m. There were no other cars in sight, just an ocean of darkness broken only by the beam of my headlights. That's when I saw him, a figure standing by the side of the road, motionless. He wasn't waving or trying to flag me down. He just stood there, as if he was waiting. I slowed down instinctively, my foot hovering over the brake. The man was dressed in a long coat, his face obscured by the shadows. For a moment, I considered driving past, but something about him was unsettling. As my car crept closer, I noticed his head slowly turn toward me, his eyes catching the light for just a second. They glinted unnaturally, like a cat's. My stomach churned, but I stopped the car anyway. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "You okay?" I called out. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the passenger side and reached for the door handle. I hadn't unlocked it, but before I could react, the door clicked open. He slid into the seat without a word, his presence filling the car like a shadow. I was frozen, unsure of what to do. Finally, I stammered, "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere," he said, his voice low and hollow. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, but I forced a nod and put the car in drive. The road ahead seemed darker now, the air in the car heavy with an unexplainable tension. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The man stared straight ahead, his hands resting unnaturally still on his lap. I tried to make small talk, but his answers were short, almost robotic. "Been out here long?" I asked. "Long enough," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. My fingers tightened on the wheel. The tension was unbearable. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye and noticed something strange. His coat looked damp, as if he'd been walking through a storm. But the night had been dry for hours. I turned my attention back to the road, trying to shake off the unease. That's when the radio crackled to life, though I hadn't touched it. Static filled the car, followed by faint whispers. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned his head slowly to look at me. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his lips curled into a faint, chilling smile. "You should have kept driving," he said. My heart pounded as the car's headlights flickered, plunging us into darkness for a split second. When they came back on, the road had changed. The straight highway was now winding, lined with unfamiliar trees that seemed to close in around us. "What's happening?" I whispered, panic rising in my chest. The man didn't answer. He simply leaned back in his seat, his smile widening as the whispers on the radio grew louder. Suddenly, the road ahead disappeared, replaced by a sheer drop into darkness. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from the edge. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared into the abyss. "Turn around," the man said, his voice now echoing unnaturally. I shifted into reverse, my hands shaking as I backed away from the cliff. But as I turned the car around, the man began to laugh, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. "What's so funny?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "You think you can escape," he said, "but you're already here." I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. The road behind us wasn't the same. Instead of the highway, there was a narrow, misty path lined with shadowy figures. They stood motionless, their faces obscured, but I could feel their eyes on me. I turned back to the man, but his seat was empty. He was gone. My heart raced as I slammed the gas pedal, speeding down the unfamiliar road, desperate to escape. The figures in the mist grew closer, their outlines becoming clearer. I couldn't make out their faces, but their presence was suffocating. The whispers from the radio turned into screams, filling the car with deafening noise. Finally, I saw a light ahead, a faint flickering sign for a diner. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires screeching as I came to a stop. I stumbled out of the car, gasping for air. The night was eerily quiet, the mist now gone. I turned to look at the road, but it was empty. No figures, no man. Just an endless stretch of highway. The diner was deserted, but I didn't care. I sat at a booth, staring out the window, trying to make sense of what had happened. That's when I noticed something on the passenger seat. A damp, folded coat. I haven't driven on Highway 22 since. But sometimes, late at night, I see him in my dreams. The hitchhiker, standing by the side of the road, waiting for his next ride.